Welcome to SEC Football Live here from the 440 Sports Network. I am Braden Gall. You can get to me on the Twitter machine or the artist formerly known as at Braden Gall. That is Stephen Godfrey at 38 Godfrey across all platforms and at splitzoneduo.com, as well as your other project. What is it again?
Who Killed College Football?
Listen, that's funny that's the name of your project, considering I'm watching lots of great football every Saturday.
Well,
it seems to still be alive, even if it's mutated into a new
take
version.
Take it up with Nick Saban. He was the one who did it.
I know you love. I love that you continue to blame him. It's partly true. If you want to jump into the comment section, we got a lot of stuff to discuss today. We're going to talk a little coaching carousel, get an update on the hot seat conversation that took place in the preseason around a number of coaches that has certainly been adjusted to date. We've had no moves. The only major move, as we've alluded to, is Brent Venables firing his buddy Seth Luttrell, an Oklahoma alumni. And we've had a couple of G5 moves so far in the last couple of weeks. So I thought, you know what? Why not sort of not a huge slate of games this weekend? Got some fun stuff to react to last weekend. But I just find it interesting that the entire carousel is fascinating. This is your world right here. So I thought, let's do an update on what's going on at Florida with Billy Napier. Where's Sam Pittman at? What's going on with Shane Beamer? I think Mark Stoops is still very much in this conversation. Different type of seat, more of his own deciding on things, but it's a little different. Clark Lee is certainly off of it. Let's do a quick little almost mid-season, three-quarter season, although I guess, Stephen, technically it is almost to the quarter pole of the season, because it drives me nuts that people say quarter pole after the first quarter of the season. The quarter pole in horse racing is actually the last quarter of the race, and so that's kind of where we're at. We're getting close to that. So I thought we'd do that today, and we'll take a look at Auburn. We'll take a look at Bama. We'll take a look at Tennessee, Kentucky. We'll take a look at what's going on with Texas A&M, South Carolina, and Texas over Vanderbilt. Lots of stuff to get to. However, we are brought to you by our wonderful and amazing sponsor, ML Rose. That is right, ML Rose, craft beer and burger joint. There are 6 locations in Middle Tennessee. I hope you enjoyed that. If you were a Texas Longhorn or an Alabama Crimson Tider or anybody else that's coming to town to play Vanderbilt, or just one of you alumni that's visiting the area or lives in the area, make sure you check out ML Rose. Great community place to go. Stephen, if you want a pregame for a football game, I know you guys put on a tailgate last week.
Oh yeah, we did.
But if you were going to do,
it rained for the first time in 7 weeks.
I know my plants desperately needed that rain. But so Friday night I went to a Sturgill show, and one of your guys from Bearded Iris, my guy Damien, shout out to Damien.
Yeah.
Damien and I closed the local bar down in my neighborhood. Not a thing that I normally do. Sturgill was exceptional. It was sensational. He played 3.5 hours straight without taking a break. Not a single break. Took him an hour and a half to even acknowledge the crowd. It was a fantastic show. He played 36 songs, Godfrey. 36 songs. Awesome.
I had no idea this show was happening. I couldn't have gone for about 6 different reasons, but I would have liked to.
Wife, child 1, child 2, child 3, job. Is that 5?
Job 5, job 7. Yeah.
Right. But shout out to Damien Bearded Iris. The ML Rose is right there next to Bearded Iris. I know you guys had a bunch of stuff going on, but if you want to go watch some college football on a Saturday morning, in particular the SEC, we've got an Ole Miss Arkansas game coming up this weekend at kickoff at 11 a.m. You get 2-for-1 beers and bloodies and bubbles. So if you like mimosas, if you like Bloody Marys, if you like beers, you get 2-for-1 every Saturday and Sunday from 10 until 2. They've got a great breakfast brunch menu. You can get the SEC sandwich. I don't know what else you need. You need an SEC sandwich. You need 2 beers. Go to ML Rose. There you go. 6 great locations in Nashville, Tennessee. That's it.
Sorry, I didn't have a pivot off of that. You've got it. He doesn't do that off of writing. It's very impressive. It's all off the dome.
That is years and years and years of live radio.
You can go to ML Rose this weekend and watch probably the only good block hour, by hour block of games this weekend.
What are you saying? Is that the 11 a.m.?
Yeah, the big noon.
So you want to know what I'm doing Saturday morning? Not to get off topic here, we're going to talk about Texas A&M.
Yeah.
So I'm so proud of her. My 6-year-old she's 6. She just turned 6 in April, just. And she made the 9U travel soccer team, which is, she's playing against girls that are committed to Auburn. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
They're large. I'll send you a photo of it. She's like half the size. But she loves it. She's obsessed with it. Football is life. And we have a 2-day tournament in Clarksville, Tennessee. this weekend. The game is at 9:15, and the second match is at like 1. So here's the idea. I'm not going to miss anything, but I'm definitely watching on a screen this size. In fact, there they are.
Right, yeah.
There's a picture of the girls right there.
This is the week to do that. This is the week to do that, man. Like, this is probably the worst week of the season, I would say.
It's not been and I know you guys.
It's been a good season.
It's been a great season, but it has not been as filled with wall-to-wall action as I am used to. Like in 2006 and 7 and 8 and 9, like when we first got started in this whole thing, there wasn't 2 buys. There wasn't, a 12-team playoff.
The 2 buys is a calendar aberration. It technically gives you another weekend of college football. So if it's light one weekend, you can't complain about that. I will say
the layers are thinner.
Scheduling problems are real. And I think it's only going to get worse. And I'm not going to derail the show, but in a week from now, when the first selection committee rankings come out, your boy's going to be in here screaming because
we are about happening on Tuesday next week.
Nope. We are about to see the hands down. Look, it hasn't happened yet, but this might be the worst case scenario of when you lump 18 and 16 team leagues together, and you don't have the teams play each other. We're about 2 weeks away from this as a legitimate conversation. If you are a fan of a 2-loss SEC team and you think like we're okay in the playoff,
it's almost all of them.
You are not. You are not.
What do you mean? So hang on. I was going to ask you about LSU and Texas A&M, but now here we are. Now here we are. Are you talking about a 2-loss team at the end of the year being 10-2 and left out? Because I think that applies to Missouri for sure. I don't think they will get in because they don't deserve to get in, even if they're 10-2.
Ole Miss lost at home to a Kentucky team at sub 500.
But they have to beat Georgia, in which case they might earn their way in if they finish 10-2. Do you see what I'm saying?
Here's what I'm saying.
What if A&M is 10-2?
There's a very likely scenario that 3 teams in the ACC finish undefeated, and one of them goes to the playoff. This isn't like a conspiracy.
No, Pittsburgh is playing Clemson, which means one of them is going to lose, and Miami and Clemson will not play until the conference championship game. What you're saying is not possible. They can be undefeated in conference play. They cannot be undefeated overall. So you should pay attention. It's a real thing.
All right. Goober. Well, as you riff, I'm going to go ahead and read this off to you. You ready?
Don't read.
You ready?
It's great. It's great.
You want to see who's...
Yes, go for it.
It's Clemson, Miami, and SMU all finishing ACC play 8-0.
Yes, but SMU has a loss already, so they will not be undefeated.
Right. But this whole idea that the 2 big leagues were just going to front load 4 teams in each, which is what the projections look like at the beginning of the season, is not jiving with reality. You're either going to have a situation in which, excuse me, I'm frog in my throat. The Big Ten and the SEC come away from this experience very angry because they didn't get the amount that they believe, which is the big fat portion. Or you're going to see, I would say, even more disenfranchisement for everyone who isn't part of those 2 leagues in college football, because you're going to see teams like a 1-loss SMU left out, or you're going to see combination thereof of BYU, Kansas State, Iowa State. Like this is shaping up to look really, really ugly in the year that it was supposed to show more of an equal and fun representation of what the sport is. But as usual, the stakeholders and honestly, the SEC and the Big Ten have utilized this to suck up more of the mind share in the space, because they own the media device by which we see the games and experience the journalism. Most of it, you don't hear about it.
So I tend to agree with you on one of the 2 options being true, which is the power brokers gobble up all the spots, Big Ten, SEC, and therefore disenfranchise teams like, let's say, Iowa State, a 1-loss Iowa State team, a 1-loss SMU team, or a 1-loss Indiana team. I also think is a very real possibility because they have a terrible strength of schedule. They're probably going to lose to Ohio State, and they might finish 11-1, and that 11-1 team might get in, or they might not. We're not sure. Missouri is 10-2 team that will not get in. If they run the table, beat Oklahoma, their 2 losses are completely ugly. Alabama needed to get healthy on that one. Now we can talk a little bit about this. I think Tennessee is interesting because they will have their loss will be on the road to Arkansas, which might be a much better version of Arkansas than we imagined, as well as on the road to Georgia, and then with wins over teams like Alabama. They don't have a great resume either, but 10-2 Tennessee I think probably gets in. 10-2 LSU would be, we'll see, but that would also include a win over Alabama at this point. So there's that. If Texas A&M's only 2 losses are to 2 playoff teams, Texas and Notre Dame, and that's their only 2 losses, they're probably getting in. The key with all of this is it's not all going to happen. People are going to lose. That's what happens every year. And
but this isn't every
year.
SMU,
Clemson, and Miami are not going to go.
This isn't every year.
The rest of the season.
The problem is there's no divisions in these teams. There's 18 teams in these leagues. There's 16 teams in these leagues. This problem is going to present and repeat until the conferences adjust and acknowledge the fact that you can't have this many teams without a pod, a division, some sort of structural representation before you get to the conference championship, or you're going to have at large undefeated teams in conference play. It's gonna break the bracket.
I don't. So I think you're in theory you are completely correct. I don't think that will happen because right now we only have one. Because we only have one team left undefeated in conference play in the SEC, and the Big Ten has 2.
But I'm not talking about the SEC. This is why no one's paying attention to this yet.
No.
All they're talking about is, the SEC's got so much parity this year. That means one of 2 things. A lion's share of multi-loss SEC teams are going to get in at the expense of undefeated or one-loss teams somewhere else, or that's not going to happen. And the conferences that take the most money from the playoff are going to get super furious.
All right, here's what I'm saying. I don't agree with you or anyone that says that Miami, Clemson, and SMU, all 3, run the table from here on out. Not going to happen. I don't think it's going to happen. If it does happen, or even if SMU loses one time, let's say to Pittsburgh, hypothetically this weekend, even if they don't have their Alabama quarterback, what's interesting is that but then what you're doing is you're arbitrarily then going back to the old way of college football, which is saying arbitrarily that because they were in the ACC, that their schedule means that they deserve it. I love SMU's story. I think it's a great story in college football, but that schedule, like Indiana's and Missouri's, I'm being equal opportunity here, right? With power, the three of the big conferences here, the schedule being trash doesn't make you trash, but it might make your resume trash, and therefore the committee might not say that you deserve to be in. I think Missouri gets left out at 10-2, and they deserve to get left out at 10-2 because I don't think their resume is good enough. If SMU is 10-2, the 0 or the 1 in the conference loss column is technically arbitrary in all of this. Now, here's the real important question I think that's off of this, because I was asked this by 2 different radio stations this week.
Mm-hmm.
Because it's not just an ACC problem. It's SEC has teams that we talked about this in the summer. Ole Miss, Missouri, Tennessee, A&M, like they're not going to play each other, right?
They didn't play each other. That's stupid.
So here's my theory on this, because I was asked this exact question, which is what's going to happen? Is this going to lead conferences to go back to divisions? And I don't think the only way that happens is if they expand again. That's the problem.
I disagree.
That's what I don't like about it, is that if you get to 20 teams, you're going to go 2 divisions of 10 teams, then you'll play everyone in your division and win your way into the conference championship game, hopefully separated by some sort of balance of power over time. I don't know how you do that.
There's also a fun talking point here. You're talking about Indiana's resume is trash. They may be in the Big Ten championship, so it's hard to say that yet. This problem that we started with at the beginning of the season, we identified this, I think, like week 2, was Missouri, Ole Miss, and Tennessee not playing each other, and all of everyone. Remember we did this? We did tiers.
We identified that in July.
tiers of we had. Hey, there's Georgia and Texas, and there's Alabama, right? The liminal space, and then those 3 teams that we just named were right below that. And then we said we don't know what LSU is. LSU is probably one of those teams down,
or A&M for that matter.
This was something that everyone saw coming. So
yeah,
I mean. The idea that it won't get fixed or it can't get fixed moving forward, there's a real easy way to fix it. And everyone in the Big Ten is going to tell you what it is. Add another
9 games.
Add another conference game.
Which they should.
If you do that, within 3 years, you will see less than 133 FBS teams. Whether anyone cares about that, whatever. I'm just telling you the economic factors of pulling off games and adding more conference games. We are moving towards something that nobody feels comfortable with, and it's happening like kind of like under our feet. And this year, everybody thought this thing was going to be clean, and it's actually probably going to end up being dirtier.
How many teams were in college football when you started in this business? Do you remember?
Just over 100,
like 118, probably.
I think it was like 109. I want to say 109 for some reason.
Wouldn't that be okay to go back to that in theory?
Well, that's up to you to tell those fan bases, man.
I don't love that idea, but like.
Well, then is it okay?
They're playing a different sport already. Like
the problem is
the last 50 teams are.
that we've bedrocked subjectivity as a metric, which is this whole thing like they have an easy schedule, they don't. We are seeing a devaluation of margins in the SEC this year. Points per game have never been closer. Margins are slimmer. Vanderbilt is beating Alabama.
Sounds good to me.
Right. What we do reflexively is we say, well, that's because the SEC is so tough. That's a subjective interpretation. What it really means this year is because of a lack of superior quarterback play, the roster movement of the NIL and portal, is that you no longer have a dominant archetype because you can't build one anymore, which means everybody's about a B minus B plus instead of having an Excelsior A team. That's what no one wants to admit down here. You go up there, everybody's screaming about it because they're used to the different model of having like one Ohio State or one Michigan, et cetera.
Well, but that model's worse because Ohio State won every championship and loses like one conference game every 3 years. I think this model is the model eventually I want all of them to get to, which is why the Big Ten expanded. I want the games to be tighter, the points differentials to be tighter, that there's not a singular if a singular dominant quarterback comes out and becomes a guy at any school, I don't care. That's great. It's a great story too. But in theory, more times than not, I would prefer not knowing the outcome of the season and seeing more teams have a possibility of winning a conference championship game. And here's what I don't like doing, and I hate that you're making me do this. I blame you. All right. This is like when my daughter says she's doing something wrong and that it's my fault that I made her do that wrong. I'm like, I feel bad.
Go ahead.
Because the conference is better. The teams top to bottom, not in any given matchup, not a one-on-one, not a Penn State at Tennessee matchup or a Tennessee at Ohio State matchup or an Oregon-Alabama matchup. I'm not saying that other teams in the country aren't totally capable and better.
I think it's fading fast.
And that would be totally fine.
The fourth best team in the Big Ten right now is Ohio State. And I think they could handle.
That's not true.
What is in the standings.
Fair, but what I'm saying is top, and this is what I always hate about this is what I hate doing this. I hate because I don't like this I just don't like this trope. The person that's like SEC. It's like, no, there is some factual basis for the opinion that the team with all of the championships and all of the players that go play in the NFL.
2014, absolutely, and in 2018, absolutely, we are in a completely new time.
They spend more money. They invest more. He who has the gold makes the rules and wins the games because they have the better players.
Buddy, why do you think Indiana's good at football right now?
On the whole, you're missing my point.
No. All of this data and all of this conjecture is built off of a model that no longer exists. Look, I keep saying stuff like this, and people keep calling me crazy until it happens. I said a Super League was coming 5 years ago, and everyone laughed. And that was before Los Angeles went to the Big Ten. Because the SEC gobbled up Red River.
That was very predictable. To move to bigger conferences was always part of the
Los Angeles to the Big Ten was predictable.
No, but Super Leagues combining into a North-South with a 50-team breakaway, that's been something that smart folks have been saying for a long time.
They haven't. They have not. Trust me, I was met with resistance at every single level and called a heretic. Greg Sankey to this day will still say there's no such thing as a Super League. There never will be. You already have more teams than you can manage, and you can't schedule them out. I'll bring it back very local for you for a second. The biggest problem in the Southeastern Conference was that about 2 or 3 rivalries basically broke the concept of divisions. When they started adding more and more teams, certain schools said, I'm not moving to the East. We can't lose this game, or we can't lose this. We have to have third Saturday in October. It's the most important rivalry. It is. If you went to one of those two schools on the whole in college football, it's probably not even top 10. Okay. We can't lose Auburn and Georgia. Okay, all right, but you guys don't want to move to the East and do that because in the Iron Bowl. So you had this one nexus in the SEC that when they started adding stuff like Red River and Missouri and Texas A&M, no one could agree on divisions. And we are going to continue to run into the problem that we had this year because I think the SEC is actually going to fight to keep it at 8 games. By the way, half the teams that are arguing that, I kind of understand. If you have to play Louisville, you have to play Louisville, you have to play Florida State, you have to play I think that sucks. That sucks. It's not Vanderbilt arguing it. It's Florida because they had to play Florida State every year. It's Georgia, believe it or not, because we got Tech. So I get that part. But they're not going to go to 9, and this is going to keep happening.
Ironically, Alabama and Auburn, the two that sort of were the linchpins that switched it to stay at 8 games because Nick Saban just sort of decided, and then Auburn followed along. What's interesting is I want to go back to your point about the overarching sort of direction of this. As a fan of the sport, I am in favor of more roster balance across the league and all leagues. I think that is good. I think that is good. That by and large, throughout the entire course of this sports history, no matter the format, no matter the rules, no matter the conference realignment or the playoff structure, for over 100 years, it is stockpiling talent because I have more resources than you. That's been the case across the sport. That's just the way it is. Some of that is dictated by geography and population trends, where Pennsylvania was churning out Hall of Fame NFL players for the 60s and 70s, and now they are not at the same rate that they used to because people have moved away due to manufacturing jobs, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. The key here, though, is that as long as it is not a draft process, which it will never be, nor do I want it to be, as long as the players have the choice to make the decisions on where to go, it will be about resources and geography. That is never
about money now. It's money.
Resources and geography. It will never not be about those things. And my question to you, while we have potential for salary revenue sharing and roster management rules that are going to come in place at some point in the future that are going to kind of manage all of the chaos that we're experiencing, why will it still not just be the team with the most resources, aka also passion, fan investment, etc., and then the one who is closest to the recruits, the 6-hour, 10-hour radius to players? Why will it not still be dictated by resources and geography, which again is going to tell you factually why more players are drafted out of the SEC every single year? They have all the best players, they have more investment and resources, and they have all the championships to back it up. Why will that not continue over in general, not like on any one team's matchup with another team? Why? Like, I'm not talking about Michigan, Alabama in the Rose Bowl in 2023. I'm talking about overall.
Why not?
Why will it? Because that part I love. That football is a great, unpredictable sport. It's great. That part's great. I love watching things that are unpredictable happen. But
so you agree with talent? You agree with a sort of flattening and an evenness of rosters, but yet you're still saying the SEC will dominate?
No, I'm saying it will be the flattening of the rosters will be limited. To me, I in my heart of hearts, I hope that we I don't think you can flatten it to 133. I think you can flatten it to the teams that play in the budgetary world that we're talking about, which is about 50 teams, which is the 2 super conferences joining to create a breakaway. So, why will that not still be the golden rule?
It excises a lot of people. You're asking 3 or 4 different questions here. If you're talking about, look, whether people want to admit this or not, there are things that are happening in the Big Ten and adjustment right now that are bringing them way, way closer in the middle and bottom tier to the SEC than people realize. The fallacy of saying, well, all these teams are losing to each other in the SEC because they're just that good is going to fall apart a lot sooner than people realize. Okay, whether anybody wants to hear this or not, that's fine.
I'm not opposed to hearing it. I want to know
why.
But
the problem here is if you play this out of like, well, it'll be the top 40, it'll be the top 50, what have you. That's a sizable amount of people that you're disenfranchising out of the sport, and that negatively affects the overall health of the sport.
Am I doing that, or is the sport doing that?
No, the sport's doing that. I'm not saying you're doing that, but I'm saying the sport continues to do that with a sort of wanton disregard to the overall health of the system. It's because there's no oversight, there's no guidance. The NCAA doesn't have actually any legislative power over the autonomy conferences. It never has, but it's gotten worse. And the scariest thing about college football is the leadership, which is really Greg Sankey and Tony Petitti right now. They control everything, save for honestly the executive. I mean, Bob Iger has a pretty sizable hand in it, right? And Fox as well.
Fox. Yeah.
Okay. They're the leadership. They're not. Look, man, history tells us one thing in American capitalism. You don't acquiesce power voluntarily. So no one's going to take it. The only reason that you would have reform and oversight to create some sort of logical balance in a sport and represent fan bases and make them feel good about it is that if something falls apart, if there's a cratering, when I say this is all backed up on a television bubble, people just kind of shrug at me. But we're getting so far off topic now. What scares me the most right now is that this 12-team playoff was introduced to create more diversity, more inventory, and more engagement. And the only reactions we have seen at an official level from those in power is to try and consolidate its representation as much as possible.
I hear you, dude, but you're still not answering, and I don't disagree with anything you're saying. You're still not answering my ultimate question, which is what? Which is that as the rules continue to create, I'm going to use the NFL style here, right? The NFL model is socialist by nature. Its entire design is to create parity, balance, roster churn. Good gets bad quick, bad gets good quick, right? Like that's the whole point. And if we are trending that way, this flattening that you're talking about, it still is not going to include until there is true revenue sharing in which you somehow can only spend X amount of dollars on players, which is what caps their ability to earn money.
Okay.
And caps, more importantly, Ole Miss's ability or Alabama's ability or Ohio State's ability, or in this case, what I'm talking about is Rutgers, Maryland, UCLA, Northwestern, Indiana, Illinois, Purdue, which is the whole bottom half of the Big Ten's inability to match even Ole Miss's resources on this stuff. And their desire, and I'm not even saying
that's coming.
And I'm not even saying it's healthy, that Ole Miss's desire to win is borderline insane.
So in other words, what you say is that despite all the warning signs to the contrary, you think the sort of cravenness of these fan bases in the secret bottom half of the SEC will continue to win out?
I think that as long as there is no cap on, I'm going to use spending as a very broad term here, right? I'm going to use spending, meaning time, money, resources, NIL dollars, portal, recruits, coaching staff, front office people, you name it, whatever, investment in winning. As long as there is no cap on that, what makes the SEC different than every other, geography, proximity to talent, that is number one, but with a bullet. But number two is time or is investment, resources. And ultimately, the difference between the SEC and every other conference has never been the commitment of Ohio State versus Alabama. It's never been that.
It's because it just means more, right?
It's never been the commitment of Ohio State. Here's the key. This is the weirdest thing about that moniker. It means more to more schools. That's the difference. That
won't matter.
That LSU and Tennessee and Florida,
it won't matter. You
aren't even on the top tier, and they are capable of winning national championships.
It doesn't matter. So who's the team that spent the most in NIL in the SEC last year, and how did they finish?
I don't have the numbers. Is it Ole Miss and Tennessee?
Texas,
I don't know.
Texas A&M.
Texas A&M, yeah.
Okay, who's spending the most right now in NIL in the SEC?
This particular season, I don't know the exact.
They got two losses. Okay,
Alabama.
That's my point.
Yeah,
you can throw your furious passion and commitment to this game around all you want. I'm telling you,
stuff, yeah.
But there's a flattening of resources coming, and there is we are in agreement that there's an NFLification coming. And people do not like it when it's described that way. They do not. But if you think look, is Indiana going to be 8 or 9-0 next year? Probably not.
No.
But guess what? There's 5 or 6 more Indianas coming. This idea that everything that's changing is automatically going to benefit the most passionate fan bases just because they said so is a fallacy that's going to be exposed in the next couple of years. This is, you talk about resources, you also have to have infrastructure. Ole Miss is spending over their value limit right now, and they haven't seen the ROI. They lost games specifically the way they lost games the way that they wanted to prevent.
I think you are blind to the level of success Ole Miss has had over the last 5 seasons consistently as like the 13th best program.
What do they have to show for it?
What does anyone in any other conference have to show for it?
They're still Ole Miss. They're all they've done is spend to recreate the first half of the Hugh Freeze era. They'll tell you this. They're furious.
Again,
is that bad money after good? If they lose one more game this year. If they lose one
difference,
but it doesn't change anything. Meanwhile, there's a better road and a more feasible path for the Marylands and Indianas of the world to get in this business.
Yeah,
that's the difference.
Because the conference is so easy. Anyway,
oh my God, dude!
I'm kidding,
dude.
I'm kidding.
This is painful.
I think ultimately, again, I think it is.
There's really nothing better or stronger than the SEC media contingent and
don't
ESPN
put me in that group.
Then don't act like it. Turning Vanderbilt and Diego Pavia into like, look, man, this is just how deep and good it is. Like, give me a fucking break.
Not what we're doing. We are having a complex, nuanced conversation about the future of the game.
Then explain why Michigan State is so good in year one. Relative to their expectations.
So good?
Relative to the expectation. Look, people thought they'd win 1 or 2 games.
Well, you will never hear an SEC. Apparently, I'm an SEC shill hack now guy, but you will never see a bigger Jonathan Smith fan in the SEC than
That's
me
what I'm
and
saying.
than me and you.
So
their quarterback has like 12 interceptions, who I like, and they are a 4-4 football team. So they are not that good.
And how much money have they spent? You talk about resources and
Zero.
passion and engagement.
Very little.
No, they're spending money. That's my point.
Okay.
Everybody, this also comes down to the unfortunate reality of state economies. Like you talk about Ole Miss right now. Ole Miss has maxed out all their credit cards. They're taking the bus home if this doesn't work. Okay,
I agree.
You have economic centers that have never previously been activated in places that are honestly just richer and more populated. That if they can solve for X, I'm telling you, it's coming. And everybody laughs at me because it just means more and all this crap down here. And I'm like, y'all, I'm Chicken Little until I'm not. That's the problem. I've been Chicken Little like 6 times.
Calm down. People don't get in shotgun fights in trailer parks in East Lansing. It's not happening, okay?
But that doesn't matter anymore. People don't get in shotgun fights in Seattle. The Seahawks could still win the Super Bowl.
But that's because the player, there is a cap on spending and investment in the roster in the NFL. And until that switch happens, which I'm not saying it's not going to happen, it absolutely could happen.
So what you're saying is like post-house settlement, when there's a disbursement for players, it'll be plus X at certain SEC schools.
Until it becomes true equal, where Indiana cannot spend any more than Alabama and vice versa. Until it is equal on acquiring, maintaining, and managing your roster, aka the guys who make plays, it is going to be about the folks, and I don't like saying this, but it's going to be about the folks who have more investment.
The cheaters.
I'm not even denying that, but more investment, whatever that means. Again, front office money, coaching staff money, roster money, etc. Go on and on down the list. It's not about how tall your waterfall is anymore, right? It's not. But that's just the different chapter of that. And until the switch is flipped and it becomes a equal revenue sharing with a salary cap, which I'm not 100% sure I love the idea or hate the idea. I'm not even sure where I'm at on that, because I love the NFL for a certain reason and I love college football for different ones. And so I'm not even sure where I fall on that. I mean, honestly, I've spent a lot of time thinking about it, but it's hard for me to not just look at he who has the gold gets the players as the golden rule in this sport for over 100 years. And until the rules change that, not the schools, until the rules change that, I don't know why that rule still wouldn't be the driving force that is tied directly to success. Not what you're saying, which is, and this is what I always say to people who are like, oh, that guy you're kind of parroting an argument. It's like, oh, that school was crazy good at recruiting and look how bad they've been. No, just because you have great players doesn't mean you're a great team. But no great team has existed without great players. What's
the point there though?
You have to have talent to win a championship.
I see a lot of talent at Oregon. I see a lot of talent at Ohio State. I see a lot of talent at Penn State. Indiana did it in a year. And like by the way, if you look at their schedule, they're going to make the playoff. And you can laugh and say it's a scheduling quirk.
I love the Indiana story. I'm not anti-Indiana.
Right. But what I'm saying is like,
they're not going to win anything.
There's talent there. There's talent right now at these places.
Okay.
It's coming. I keep telling SEC fans, I was like, look, there's
a lot of talk here.
there's two pieces of anxiety here. Is that there's like fans at South Carolina, Mississippi State, whatever. They're like, hey, if there is a real Super League one day where it's capped at 30 and it's national, are we going to make it? That was the talk for a long time.
Oh,
I don't see that that division wouldn't work well contractually right now, the way the TV deals are structured, because they're inventory reliant.
Yeah.
So I don't think like as they go into the 36 change, meaning that most of the TV contracts will roll over by 2036. I don't think that will be the issue.
Well,
the second anxiety is the SEC way, the dominance they've had since the BCS was introduced until now, under threat because of a democratization of resources and investment. And my answer to that one is yes.
I hope you are correct, because I would love to see balance. I would love to see it. But that would require, and that's why the House settlement is so important, but that would require a set of guidelines and oversight on the sport that does not exist yet. And when that day comes that the oversight happens and it changes, we'll have a different conversation. But until that time, the reason Ohio State has been Ohio State in the Big Ten was because they do care more and they invest more in caring more and therefore ask for results.
Yeah.
And that's the way the sport has worked forever. I mean, that's just the way it is. And they have, oh, by the way, a nice little 6-hour radius around them in Columbus where they have really good football players relative to West Lafayette, Indiana,
but what do you do if
Fayetteville, Arkansas?
What do you do if you are as passionate as all those places that you just named, and you're Baylor or Clemson or Kansas State or BYU? Like, you're just screwed. Like, you just are.
I don't disagree with your premise that if there is a new set of rules that only applies to like 48 schools, that there are a bunch of teams that get hosed in all of this. Yeah. I'm watching Oregon State and Washington State right now. They're hosed. I don't disagree with you. I'm not arguing with you on that.
How inconvenient is it for ESPN and the College Football Playoff Committee that Wazoo has?
Like, I sure hope they're 11-1.
You damn know they were cheering for Boise in that game.
All right. Okay. Okay. All right. LSU, Texas. Let's talk SEC football. 38 minutes in.
This is I will say this is my favorite offense right now, which is insane to say.
LSU or A&M?
A&M. Because
which half were you watching, Godfrey? Which half?
Here's why. We weren't wrong. We were just really early on talking about Colin Klein. We were about 3 months early. Or two.
We were.
Look, man, it ain't cheating that you bring in the running quarterback to score a bunch of touchdowns in the game. Like, it's just that's adjustment, right? That's versatility.
The plan was always to get dominated so hard that they had to bench their guy.
I think Nuss is really good. And I think that I do think that there has been a weird, you're talking about a topic for another show, and the SEC may actually be the best place to look at this year. There is a weird fealty towards, we rode with this guy. We named him the starter in August, and then we're going to go back and forth. I don't want to get into the Texas thing again, like the University of Texas thing again, but there a lot of teams are flipping around and sort of not feeling 100% comfortable with the 1 or the 2 or even the 3 in certain situations. I think for this season, A&M has handled it better than a lot of schools that I could
Oklahoma,
mention, right?
I said this the day they didn't put Jackson Arnold back in the starting lineup. I was like, stay with Arnold. You're not being patient enough with the guy. Like, I'm not saying he's going to be the hero, but like, you got to be patient with the guy you chose to run Dylan Gabriel off for.
I feel bad for Greg Penn. The quote that came out after the game that we didn't prepare for it, honestly. We didn't think he was going to come to the game. Him coming into the game kind of caught us off guard. We didn't really know what runs they were going to run.
He started games for this team.
Okay, I'll break this up. This is some inside baseball stuff.
Oh, okay.
None of what he just said is technically false. But it also, it's not that kid's fault for being honest. God knows we seek honesty in the media. And then,
Brian Kelly said it after the game.
He did. Yeah. He had a modified version of it. But for the situation that Blake Baker inherited and the things that they were fundamentally like subpar at, or at least relative to like, hey, dude, you just had a Heisman quarterback who's tearing up the NFL right now. Like, you've been the glaring weakness on this team for a while. He still did not get them, I would say, up to standard in time. That being said,
they were significantly better than week 1, 2, and 3. In the first half. They were very good in the first half.
I mean, that USC loss looks worse and worse. But the idea that they had nothing prepared, I don't think is true.
Yeah, that can't be true. Because the guy, Marcel Reed started games. He's started games.
Okay. How many? I'm not asking you. All right. How many hours, if you're listening to this right now, do you think a college football team spends on install week to week? Just installation, not even running it, repping it.
Very little.
It's like less than 6 hours.
Yeah, very little.
Because, believe it or not, all the things we just got done talking about in the NFLification, one thing that hasn't caught up is the actual real schedule, not the football schedule, the day-to-day life schedule.
Yeah, because the 20-hour work week,
dude. Is small. It is brutally short. And some of the more aggressive things that happen behind the scenes are the decisions of we can only put so much in week to week. We can only scout so much in advance.
If Marcel Reed had never played, I think it's a legitimate excuse.
Absolutely.
The fact that he has started games, to me, says you should have at least broken off like 10% of your game plan to say, just in case, even if it's just a package, this guy does something totally different. Yeah.
So earlier in my career, I did this 9 or 10 times, I think, where I would spend a week embedded and I would have total access to all the rooms in the building. And I've been in situations before where a team was going to play Ohio State and at the time Ohio State was using more than one quarterback. And like I'll throw out give me a noun real fast. Give me an animal, right? Like
an
dog.
Animal?
So like we have a dog package for if their running QB comes in, we have a dog package. All right. So we're going to adjust our front, we're going to change our fits, and we're going to probably assign backers and maybe bring up a safety to know, hey, he's going to go wide zone. He likes to do this. There are
Dog
4
package.
or 5 responses in our hypothetical dog package. Okay. And it doesn't get much more than that because colleges can't install, uninstall, and modify to the depth and to the specificity that the pros can. That's why pro calls, even on defense, pro calls get over 10 words sometimes.
Well, and here's the other thing. Sorry, I didn't mean to cut you off there. The other thing about the NFL is, and this goes back to our stockpiling of talent conversation, which is that the NFL only has so much depth that you can prepare for on any given Sunday. There's just not that much. There are no like unknown players in the NFL that just come out of nowhere. Like I spent some time with the Titans this past year. I cover the Titans here locally, and I spent some time with them before cutdown day, talking to some folks about like, how much are you scouting other teams? And they are watching every player on every team before cutdown day to know who they should go out and get. So, and that's like an extra 30 players per team that are all eliminated largely from the league as soon as cutdown day happens. The college teams are 100 players. There are legitimately players on the team that Mike Elko has never seen before play a football game.
You was about
Marcel Reed is not one of them for Brian Kelly.
SEC fans talk very passionately about recruiting. They've turned it into a second season. It's kind of the spine of the whole year-round culture of SEC
I don't know
football.
what you're talking about.
The problem with that is it may occur to you don't want your coordinator or defensive backs coach or QB's coach on the phone with some freaking 2029 verbal commit running back, because in the league, this is when they're adjusting and planning for these type of contingencies. So I felt bad for the kid for being honest for a second. I think that I don't believe it was 100% true that they had nothing. I think they were definitely prepared for Connor and for a different look from A&M. But it's also like Reed ripped them up. Like
it's one of those things where it's like the coach who gets in trouble for having a bunch of shit happen on his watch. Yeah. It's one of two things. It's either ignorance that you should have known about something and you didn't plan for it, or you plan for it and you plan for it terribly. Like it can only be one of the, either Brian Kelly's staff didn't prepare them for Marcel Reed, and that's a problem, or they did prepare and they prepared incorrectly, and that's a problem. Either way, it's on you. So
can you think of like all of the big SEC games that we've had this season that have been in that like Fowler Herb Street slot, just off the top of your head? Well, nope, I already answered it. It's Georgia, Alabama. This was a micro Georgia, Alabama. This was This was a 17-7 game that looked one type of way. LSU, by the way. One type of way going into the half. And then when you just look at the box score, sometimes it is this simple and you don't need, sorry, Bill, you don't need advanced analytics. And then A&M scores 14 and 17 after only a touchdown. And by the way, LSU's offense, gone.
To me, this was almost, it was a little, I agree it's a fair comp, but it was unique in how the piece and how the story unfolded. Yeah. For them to make a quarterback change, for it to be at home, for them to go literally every single drive, and for Nussmeier to do things he has not done the entire season, mistakes that he has not made the entire season. Look, it just is what it is. LSU gets a week off now, and they'll play Alabama in 2 weeks. A&M, here's the question about A&M. And because I think we've talked about this team very highly, and with the Colin Klein dynamic, which is clearly what Marcel Reed does well, is execute Colin Klein's offense the way he wants to run it. And what's interesting to me is we could have a Texas A&M showdown where both teams have a combined one loss. They're playing for a spot in the SEC championship game, and we don't know who either team is going to start at quarterback, which is fantastic just as a media member. Ooh. But here's my question about A&M moving ahead to this week against South Carolina, because I find this matchup to be very interesting. 2.5 point spread. Vegas tells you South Carolina going to play well.
I feel like you do this with I feel like you do this with Carolina games. I feel like we've had this conversation twice before the season where an obviously better team, you're like, I find this game intriguing. You did this with Ole Miss.
I did. I think I did it with LSU going there, and it turned out to be a great football game.
Yeah, but I think that was more the broken clock theory, because maybe. But so you have more faith in Carolina.
That may be true, but I like their defensive line, which is going to give A&M's offensive front a little bit of trouble. Here's my question about A&M, and this is a very vague, broad one, which is when you are not a fully baked cake as a program, like Elko's year one, I get it. They're much more talented than a year one rebuild. I get all of that.
Yeah.
I get the context, but you don't necessarily get benefit of the doubt coming off a huge emotional win where you changed your quarterback and got dominated in the first half, as you do if you've been established for 5 or 6 or 7 years from a coaching staff standpoint. And so that, to me, that's what makes this interesting is the letdown, the emotion, the kids, the not fully bakedness of the program yet under Mike Elko, which, by the way, also classic, fantastic post-game comments by that coach in that game as well. Both coaches.
We could have done an hour on that, and I don't buy the apology at all, but I also think he didn't need to apologize, and two,
I agree with that.
If you were doing a shade throwing seminar, that should be the centerpiece on how to do it, because he doesn't ascribe it to a specific character. It applies to more than one person.
It does apply to more than one.
But guess what? You also know anytime you can shade your second biggest rival's head coach and your predecessor at the same time,
maybe
that was a magic trick.
Maybe even the athletic director
of A&M or LSU.
The previous athletic director.
I think.
No, it's clearly about Fisher. Mike Elko, if you missed this, Mike Elko after the games basically, and I'm paraphrasing here, but said, this is a real program. This ain't a bunch of lying politicians just running their mouths. I'm paraphrasing, but that's basically the gist of it. That is clearly directed at Jimbo Fisher, but it's also directed at a whole lot of other people too, which is hilarious to me. Anyway, do they not? To me, they don't get the benefit of the doubt going on the road against a team that can beat you in a hostile environment at night with a good defensive line. You just don't get the benefit of the doubt yet until you're a fully baked cake, and I don't think they're there yet. I think they should go win the game. They're a better football team. They should go win the game.
I don't think it's that's why I don't think it's going to be much of a game. Is I think
Vegas is begging you to take A&M.
Vegas is not always correct. Vegas is not always correct. There are some weird teams this year. As a total aside, there are some weird teams because I have friends who work in the gambling industry in Vegas where. Speaking of adjustments, Vegas has been wrong consistently on a couple teams. I don't gamble, so this doesn't mean anything to me, but apparently Vegas has been wrong on UCF like dramatically, like 4 or 5 times. So
what SEC teams has it been? I'm honestly asking.
I'm going to ask. I didn't know. I want to ask. I think, Arkansas, but that
I was going to say,
they don't consider that because I was asking about Arkansas. They don't consider that when the expectation is set so low, and then you get into conference. Like it's actually, if you mention the A&M game specifically for Arkansas, it's when they will allow themselves adjustment. I guess it has, and this is where I'm not a mathematician.
Yeah.
The deeper you get into the season, the less it should be harder and harder to bet college football as the season goes on, because we get more and more data, and those numbers and formulas and algorithms get tighter and tighter. But apparently UCF has the back door's been open the entire time. And I don't know if there's a specific SEC one, but there have been a lot in that Big 12 down to the G5 level where misses keep happening. So I don't know enough about gambling. It's just it was relayed to me by someone.
It doesn't help that UCF is on its 4th quarterback of the year. That certainly is a factor.
I'm not sure if there's a formula to confuse the Vegas math, but this one is I do think there's an there may be an exhaustion factor for A&M here.
So here's what we're gonna do. Since you and I completely bogarted the show, and I'm gonna have to redo all the graphics and headlines that are all incorrect.
I'll do the hot seat. I'll do it.
No, we don't have time. We don't have time for that.
I can do it in 3 minutes.
No, because I don't want to talk about the hot seat per se. I want to talk about the change, all the changes we were just talking about, and how they apply to decision making higher up above coaches.
Yeah, and so you don't have to change anything. I got you. You ready?
No, we don't have Godfrey. I want to talk about Ole Miss, Arkansas. I want to talk about Vandy, Auburn. I want to talk about Florida, Georgia. I want to talk about Alabama winning last week. There's football I'd like to talk about. And
Vandy, Auburn's rough.
We argued about other things, and we can still do the coaching carousel is fascinating to me because I think you have this house settlement we talked about. We've got budgets at these schools that they're being prepared for in very different ways. We've got NIL and roster management. We got portal rules that have changed. We have a brain drain that's taking place with coordinators, G5, NFL coaches that are all sort of affecting all of this. And oh, by the way, a backdrop with a playoff structure that now is keeping more teams interested for longer, which was the goal, which I think is for this all to slow down, the carousel to slow down and people not to be making a bunch of moves. 2 years ago in 2022, we had 5 P5 openings by October 2nd. We have none, and it's a full month later. That's a good thing for the sport, in my opinion, for the players, for the fans. It's a good thing for the sport. But I want to talk through why that is the case. We can get to the specifics later because that's not as important to me. Billy Napier's not fired yet, okay? Mark Stoops hasn't retired yet, okay? Shane Beamer and Clark Lee are better, and Sam Pittman has probably won his way off of it. I don't care about that as much. I care more about what are the factors we need to know about how it affects decision making. How does it affect the folks that are making decisions? All these factors. And I wanted to wait till next week, but here we are.
The SEC won't feel this effect. Is the short answer. I wrote this column for the Washington Post 2 weeks ago. There is a tremendous slowing of the carousel because I just said carousel like I was carousel. There's a tremendous slowing of the carousel because a lot of people can't forecast against the House settlement as it will relate to how would we take. This is a bad example. Jimbo's buyout is a bit much, but let's do your normal.
Go Gus Malzahn buyout.
Gus still too big. All right,
20 million.
Most schools are eating a buyout something like they would consider to be large in the tens, right? As in like $10 million. Okay, so let's look around the league and you because I remembered that almost all of the teams that were open in 22. I was starting to pull some of those were long term. A lot of those weren't in like big fish contract situations. And it was like, oh, hey, we've waited this out. We finally want to do it. Paul Christ was involved in one of those. And that was like a more longer protracted situation at Wisconsin. Yes, there is a slowdown. If you're a Florida fan listening to this, it won't affect you. I just want to make you feel better or worse. I don't know. Florida can find that money tomorrow. That's not ever going to affect a program like Florida. It's not going to affect any of the top end programs in the two big two conferences because of the amount of revenue that they have. We are finally in a little bit of a lull where those programs, and you could list them off if you wanted to waste time, have either made changes recently enough to where they're just not applicable right now or don't have a weird Mel Tucker type, Hugh Freeze type situation. So that's part of the slowdown. You will still see movement in places that can afford it because that's how the machine works. So if you're asking me, do I expect Florida to open? Yes, I expect Florida to open. There's no reason to move right now only because it's so messy in Gainesville. We have a weird thing here happening this year. The likeliest and most expensive and then also most coveted spot in the SEC to open has a really bad leadership situation going on. Yeah. Even worse than a normal Auburn year or a normal Auburn opening.
Whoa.
Right. Because look, give Auburn credit, Braden. When they change coaches every 5 seconds, they will at least appoint an interim ringleader, which is how you end up with Brian Harsin. This is not the case right now in Florida. I think it could play out until season's end.
It's the inmates running the asylum. But
here's my question back.
You know.
What's the point? So look, dude.
Oh, I agree.
They're gonna get smacked this weekend. They're gonna get smacked. What's the point?
By Georgia, yeah. What's the point?
No, I'm saying if you if you fire him this weekend or if you fire him in 2 weeks or you fire I don't that dynamic has changed. That dynamic has changed tremendously because you can't it doesn't matter. The other thing too, Braden, to your point is if they go vetting coaches, a lot of them are going to be in the playoff race.
Yes, and so you can't go grab a guy that you want anyway. And so ultimately,
being early to market may not be as valuable as it used to be.
Yes, that's exactly the point. And
may not, according to agent, may not.
And I think that's interesting. I think that's an interesting development right now because, again, that's about player management. That's about the playoff. That's about budgets. It's about buyouts. It's about so much stuff. And that is interesting that our entire sport, the most important people in the sport, the coaches, are sort of governed by these new forces. That is fascinating.
But the other problem on the back end of that is that while it's healthier for the sport to have less openings mid-season, in my opinion, where you're not like, hey, that guy's an interim, hey, that guy's an interim, like that kind of I covered it and I make money off of it. It sucked. Like it's not good for the product. The problem is they haven't fixed the back end. You're gonna you have the playoff, coaching searches, hirings, assistant changes, high school signings, and a portal open all at the same time. Oh, and it's Christmas too. That's still a disaster. And so if you are Florida, you still have to bring someone in who can put a plan together in like 6 days.
Look, the war on Christmas is not other holidays. It's not other religions because Christmas has taken over the entire calendar. The war on Christmas is exclusively being fought by college football.
Dude, there's a very narrow circle you just drew, but we're both dads and we're both in this industry. It's like, this is starting to suck.
December's been broken for 2 years, and
dude, taking phone calls from assistant coaches at G5 programs who want it like on Christmas Eve, because I have to.
Like, well, what What do you think about his defensive
Call me on the
scheme?
28th. Call me on the 28th.
Ole Miss at Arkansas. I find Sam Pittman, again, we'll get more into these specifics of these guys next week in terms of actual, like, should they or shouldn't they move, or is it the right time to move? And we can talk about, I still think Mark Stoops is going to retire at the end of the year. Certainly looks like a football team that's playing for a coach that wants to retire at the end of the year, and maybe took a job at the end of last season that didn't get it. That's what it looks like to me. And they continue to get dominated at the line of scrimmage. I don't know why Tennessee wouldn't do the same thing to them this weekend in a rivalry game at Neyland, where Dylan Sampson's the best player on Tennessee's team right now. Otherwise, the Vandy at Auburn is fascinating just because Pavia beat them last year at New Mexico State with two coaches back in Kill, and it would be just I am not anti-Auburn.
Same defensive scheme.
I've said before. I know.
Durkin's going to call the same defense this weekend.
I know. I say this as someone who has openly shilled to Auburn as the city being one of my favorite places in the conference. But I'm sorry if you are not rooting for Diego Pavia at Vanderbilt to get bowl eligible by beating Auburn on the same field that he beat them last year with a different school that is hilarious to me. It's just worth rooting for. Ole Miss at Arkansas is the most interesting one, though, outside of A&M South Carolina. Because Ole Miss still controls its own destiny, because if they beat Georgia, as we talked about earlier, they could still play their way back into the conversation in terms of the playoff. I don't think that's going to happen, but it's possible. But Arkansas has been very dangerous at home. That they're coming off a 60-point. They dropped a 60 burger on Mississippi State last week. Pittman has built a very nice coaching staff that continues to do work. They have overachieved. I think he might be safe at this point. Although I did have somebody tell me keep an eye on Pittman for retirement purposes this year, which I'm not. That's interesting to me.
We'll see.
I don't think he does that. I think he's kind of got a second win here. He got a second. He could.
Here's why I don't think it'll happen. His contract clicks over after if you're bowl eligible. They have 5 wins. They still have Louisiana Tech, folks.
Ole Miss 6-2 on the road. Always a strange game. This should be interesting because I think Williams is a really good coordinator. I think he's going to challenge Ole Miss. I think the other side of the ball is the test here, because that's where Ole Miss's defense has been very, very good this year. It's been very good
until it hasn't.
Hey, they didn't lose to Kentucky.
They did lose to Kentucky
because of the defense.
Yes, they did.
I thought it was the offense that struggled.
They did. They went to a bad man scheme on a 4th down play on Kentucky's 11-yard line, and that was the game. It was you talk about this series historically. This may be one of those things. We did this on A&M and LSU last week, Braden. If you don't know, you might not know if you're not from that region. I would not call this a rivalry. I mean, maybe in the Houston Nut part of this thing, it's not a rivalry. This series produces weird things. Yes. 4th and 23, the Brett Bielema era that knocked Ole Miss out of the SEC championship at the college football playoff a couple years ago. That may be more than a couple years ago now. Yeah, this was the overtime record setter in the 2000s before someone else took its place. I could just rattle off a bunch of stuff like the first Houston Nut versus Petrino game. There were media fighting each other on the sideline. That's not a joke. It's a very weird series. And just I believe the last time it was in Fayetteville, Braden, wasn't that the KJ Jefferson Matt Corral game where they combined for 100 odd? It was just a straight up Big 12 shootout.
No, I think it was even worse than that. It was more like Geno Smith, Bryce Petty Big 12 shootout.
Nice.
It was like a 63-58 kind of game. Not even a high scoring football game, but a basketball, like an actual basketball score. Yeah. Look, I'll disagree with you. I know they made a bad play against Kentucky, but that's a top 3 defense nationally in yards per play, one of the best stop rate defenses. And I think Petrino's done a great job in sort of going. He just says he's throwing caution to the wind with Taylor Green and saying, let's roll, man. Let's do whatever we got to do. So I think that's the interesting matchup here. I would not be surprised if some crazy shit happens and Arkansas wins the game and all of a sudden we're looking at the unraveling of – because I think Ole Miss and Kentucky are they are nearing unraveling territory. Kentucky might already be there.
Well, but for wildly different reasons and circumstances.
Yep.
I sure have not had anybody say, hey, just checking in. Is Lane going to Florida? Haven't had that question in a while.
That's interesting.
Lane Kiffin and they've painted themselves in very, very different corners, but in the same room. They're kind of stuck with each other.
Yep. So you're not necessarily disagreeing. We're an hour here in, so no,
what?
You don't necessarily disagree with me on Stoops, huh? I think dad dies of a heart attack. Brother retires early.
Yeah, I want to
with the
go.
administration.
I want to go check on some things probably in the next 10 days. Because it is such a look. I will say this: your theory is very good. It's a good on paper theory. But what I will say about Mark Stoops is that he is a pit bull, and he's a bulldog. What I mean by that is the stubbornness to do what is obvious, to resist what is obvious, is potent. And from speaking with people who've worked on that staff and in and around that staff, Mark would just as easily say, I just re-upped, buy me out. I'm not going anywhere. I'll run it back for another year. I don't care. God. Already divorced, wife's gone. Like, I could totally see that happen. Should he is a totally different. I didn't say that. We didn't discuss should he. We're talking about will he.
No, I know. I just think that
he and that AD hate each other, and it's just
that's what I'm saying.
I don't think he'd give him the satisfaction.
Oh, I see what you're saying. Because I think there's a lot of pent up frustration about hitting the ceiling. That he's hit the ceiling, and that's all he's got left.
He did.
He's got the whole thing with his family and his whole history of his brother and his dad. He's also accomplished everything you could ever really accomplish at Kentucky. On top of that, he's losing games the way he, as a prideful, to your point, kind of stubborn guy. And I think a great sense of humor. I like Mark Stoops. I actually think very highly of Mark Stoops. But I think what's interesting is that he's losing games in a way that like affects him personally. It's different when you lose games by being pushed around physically, where you are the reason you've been good your whole life is building a great defensive front, and Vanderbilt is running the ball on you like that. And I'm not trying to be, that's not an anti-Vanderbilt, comment there. I'm just saying you're getting pushed around, dominated by South Carolina, dominated by Vanderbilt line of scrimmage. Sure, you beat Ole Miss and staved off whatever it is that we're talking about here. You just got crushed by Auburn. 274 yards, Jacquez Hunter, great job. Florida destroyed you, and Tennessee's about to destroy you. It saps your soul sometimes. And I've seen it happen to lots of coaches. I know you've seen it happen to coaches too.
Yeah, and I'm not going to argue any of that. I have a tough time thinking Mark would want to go out that way if he's
Fair
not. They see, the thing is like the structure of the deal. It's like it's hard to force him.
I don't disagree.
I do think there are a lot of. I will say this. I don't think this is like reporting or news breaking here. There are a lot of people in Lexington who would love for your theory to be true. Who maybe have already made phone calls to see what the market looks like.
Every now and then, a guy who's very good for a school and accomplished a shit ton for a school and vice versa. Because if you drove down that main avenue right there in Lexington, where all the athletic department buildings are located and all the stadiums are located, when he took over, it was a glorified G5 program.
Dude, football facilities were bad.
But it's not even just that the rising tide has never that rising tide raises all boats thing has never been truer than at Kentucky athletics, where football built so much other stuff too, and basketball, other things as well. Softball program's very good now. Baseball program's been very good for a while, but that is a different program.
He would get to outlast Calipari,
which
I'm sure he'd be very happy. They did not like each other.
All he cares about. But my point is that every now and then, an amicable divorce where it's just time for different things for both parties is kind of where I'm at with this one.
I think
I've been there.
I think your logic is too smart. I think it makes too much sense because these situations are governed by ego.
Yeah, and money. Yeah, I know.
He loses out, man. I don't know.
All right, MO Rose, everybody, go to MO Rose. It's a great place to eat food and watch football and drink beer. How about that? That's right off the. I didn't even write that, Steven.
That was brilliant.
I know. Meta, very next level.
Insightful.
At 38 Godfrey on Twitter and Instagram and everywhere else you are in the social media world. Splitzoneduo.com and whokilledcollegefootball.com.
WKCFB.com. Who Killed College Football. You can search it on Substack or anywhere you find podcasts.
There you go. You can get to me at Braden Gall as well. So next week on the show, we will talk about coaching changes coming up, and I guess maybe more football. That is for sure. Thanks for listening, everybody. Rate, review, subscribe on a podcast app. If you do not give us 5 stars, you are a hater. And if you're on YouTube, thumbs up, notifications, all that great stuff. We do appreciate you guys. Otherwise, have a great weekend, everybody. We will talk to you next time.